All right, afternoon all. Thank you very much for having me. I'm Jack, and today we're going to be going through some machine learning models that we've developed at the Hong Kong Jockey Club for predictive horse performance. Now, I'm a betting analyst for the Jockey Club. Does this work? Yep. What do I actually do day to day? Generally, I describe my job as having three main pillars. First of all, monitoring betting markets. That's illegal, legal, live, and also historically. Meaning is given to this data when we analyze it, but particularly when we analyze it in regards to the performance of the horse. And the reason that we do this is to identify suspicious betting trends, which then can form catalysts in investigations. So today we'll be looking at mainly the performance aspect of my job. And why? Performance is a good indicator of both betting moves and actual performance. But from an integrity perspective, when the parity between either of these is broken, there may be an integrity risk present, which is exacerbated even further when the parity between the betting move and the performance on the day is upheld. So to combat this, what we've tried to do is develop models capable of accurately predicting the current performance of the horse. Now, what parts of actual performance do we want to predict? A pretty obvious starting point is the starting price of the horse. And as you can see up here in Hong Kong, just like in any efficient market around the world, starting price is a great indicator of actual performance. You can see how highly correlated the graph there is on your left. But perhaps surprisingly, settling position of the horse is a really good indicator as well. So much so that in Hong Kong since 2011, if you were to bet to collect the same amount on every single horse that settled within one length of the lead, you would be winning 10% on turnover. As such, these are two models that we focused heavily on developing. So next, I'll try and take you through and perhaps demystify machine learning a little bit. So turning it from perhaps a buzzword, maybe into something a bit more tangible. And I'll do that by going through a flowchart on how we as a team have developed these models. So first, we need to define the problem. Essentially, machine learning is really just a minimization algorithm. Looks and tries to minimize the difference between what you want to predict and your predictions. Next, we collect our data. So here, we need to know what ingredients go into the soup, so to speak. And we also need to know how many of them we need. For these purposes, it's about 100,000. And in racing, this amount of data isn't too hard to get. We're a very data-rich sport, and hence, these technologies we naturally lean towards. Then we process the data. So like cleaning in real life, this is a little boring, but I'll try and talk about how we split the data and why. So we split the data into a training set, a test set, and a validation set. The key here is that the test set is data that the model has never seen before. Hence, what we want to do is when we run the model over the test set, we want it to have a similar accuracy than we do when it trains. And that shows us that in real life, this model is going to work. Next, we choose our model. Can get technical and talk about the complexities of different models, the type of data you feed in, but realistically, trial and error also works pretty good here. Then we move on to training the models. So to train the models, what they do themselves is they cross-validate, which essentially just means they run again and again to make sure the end outputs are very consistent. After you do that, you see if your goal's met. And that just means, are our predictions actually accurate enough for our use case? If not, go back to the drawing board, tune the parameters. What I mean there is these parameters are actually intrinsic to each different machine learning model. And again, we can essentially trial and error here to see which parameters give our model the best predictions. This is done in a cyclical way. So you go over and over again until you meet your goal. At that point, your model is ready for deployment. If you never meet your goal, it's time to go back to the drawing board and potentially choose a different model, which might suit your use case a little better. So now we'll move on to, this is an old one, sorry. Now we'll move on to some models that we've actually made for use in the Jockey Club. First up is predictive settling positions. So we're currently using this on race day as a historical reference, but also a predictive metric. And in terms of integrity, as Kim outlined very well, one case is horses settling further back to decrease their chances of winning. And this was at the forefront of a case I worked in Racing Victoria, with two jockeys intentionally getting further back to decrease their horses' chances of winning. Now, in terms of the models that we use for the speed maps, we have 5 separate models which we use in parallel, get the best bits of each and combine them for the best possible prediction. Each of these models uses 51 different variables. That ranges from things as simple as barriers and jockeys, up to things like sectional times, stewards' comments, even track work. So each model is trained on over 100,000 horse runs with an average error of about 1.49 lengths in training. And that's just the raw difference between where the horse actually settles and where we've predicted it to settle. It's also tested on over 40,000 horse runs. This is the unseen data. So you can see here the consistency between the training data and the test data is quite good. Then, in terms of our validation, which has happened this season in production of our model, the average error has increased slightly to 1.57 lengths. We can see in the graph over here that the horses with a deviation of less than 1 length account for about 46% of overall runners. So another way to say that, 46% of runners are mapped within a length of where they actually settle, which, to put in context, when over a horse's career, its average deviation to its own pattern is about 1.2 lengths. So we're getting close to the natural noise of the system, which is quite decent. Now, if we dig deeper into the results, horses not on debut and horses which aren't slow away, if we discount them from our data set, our accuracy increases to 1.45 lengths, with 78% of horses settling in within 1 length of where they were predicted. In terms of the key features of our model, a good sanity check. As you'd expect, previous margin from lead, barrier, jockey are all great predictors of where a horse is supposed to settle. Difficulties though. These involve things like wider draws, lack of data, debutantes. Again, pretty much as you'd expect. And you can see there from the bar chart, our mid, rear and rear horses, where you have slow out horses in that data set, are significantly higher. And finally, patterns in terms of trainers and jockeys. You can see that the difference between the least and most consistent jockey is 1.2 lengths, whereas a trainer's only 0.5. So jockeys have a far greater bearing on the horse's settling position. And in Hong Kong, the difference is rather large over a length. Now, we'll take you to the other models which we've developed, the pricing models. These include a starting price model, or a predicted price, as well as the true odds of winning, or the assessed price. These models are far more complex, with 329 features going into each. As such, when used for integrity, we need to be careful that we're able to interpret what these models actually do. It's no good in an inquiry if we say, oh, the model told me it was going to be there. We need to know why. As such, we choose a cubist model, which is essentially a combination of decision trees and linear regression, each quite readily interpretable. Now, in terms of the targets, what we're trying to model for the true odds of winning, we use a repricing algorithm where the winner is always favourite and the rest of the horses' prices are spread out based on how far they get beaten. Results for the model, where our starting prices are predicted within 3.6%, whereas the true odds are in 5.2%, and that's in terms of implied win probability. So you can think about that as if you have a $5 chance and you're 4% off, that's like marking it $6.25, so fairly consistent. Difficulties, again, rather similar to the speed maps, but I do want to point out that very short odds horses or odds on horses are very difficult to predict. And that's because, one, a lack of data, but two, they take up a huge amount of percentage in the market. This can be alleviated somewhat by accounting for favourite long shot bias, where favourites take up less vig than longer priced horses. Also, something I should point out is retraining the model. To keep up with trends, we need to train the model in Hong Kong about 4 times a season. And proof being in the pudding, well, this season so far, we've predicted about 42% of late market firms correctly, 68% of late market drifts. And in terms of under and overvalued horses, that is looking at the assessed price versus the predicted price, we have between a 10 and 15% edge on the actual market. So combining those two, we see that overvalued horses are more robust in terms of the modelling, which is great for our betting analysis, particularly looking at illegal markets. Finally, I'll take you through a few variables for these models. So in the middle here, we have variables which work well for both and are key for both. Firstly, late sectional times. Then, which is very good, our speed maps form key for both models, and also Glyco2 rating. This is a rating actually adapted from gaming, particularly chess, which we've adapted for use in racing. And over one side of the graph, we can see variables which are potentially overvalued by the market, key for predicted price, but not necessarily for assessed. They're pretty standard variables, things like beaten margins and starting prices. Whereas variables which are undervalued are potentially more complex. Sectional times in the middle stages. How many miles in the horse's legs are there in the lead up to the event? And even things like horse age and race number, which have some kind of covariance with things like track bias. So by the last race, you might want to be off the fence. And I'll leave you quickly with the fact that all these models have been built on a laptop using free to access software. Take about a day to train, about 30 minutes to come up with calculations for a full race meeting. So if you want to do something like this in your own jurisdiction, there's not much stopping you. Thank you very much for your time.